Hi everybody, my name is Brady and I'm a 19th century American historian, and we are back with another React video, and today we're going to be continuing Mr. Beat's American presidential election series with the election of 1832, which should be fun. We have Andrew Jackson in office, which always makes for a good time. One thing that I'm curious about, though, is something that I don't know, are the numbers on this election. I kind of wonder if enthusiasm went up or down. I know people were still fans of Andrew Jackson, but I wonder if there was any, slight fluctuation that I may have overlooked over time. So I'm looking forward to kind of the ending part where they show the numbers on this, but I can't imagine it's going to fluctuate all that significantly. But there's plenty of other stuff to talk about with this election. I'm sure John C. Calhoun will come up, so that'll be fun. Let's get it started.
Mr. Beat presents Presidential Elections in American History. The 12th presidential election in American history took place from Friday, November 2nd to Wednesday, December 5th, 1832. President Andrew Jackson, seeking re-election of course, was very popular during his first term, while not so popular with his vice president, John Calhoun, who would resign shortly after the election over differences relating to tariffs that hurt his home state of South Carolina and several other personal reasons.
So the big problem between the two is going to be the nullification crisis, which is where South Carolina decides, hey, we're not going to recognize federal law. This law is bunk. We don't want this, so we're just going to not listen to it. It's this sort of principle that the states can decide which federal laws they want to listen to. But doesn't that remind you of something? It probably reminds you of the Articles of Confederation, where you couldn't get all the states on the same page, and then the federal government is basically a joke at that point. So that's kind of what John Calhoun is doing here. And Andrew Jackson would not have that. He was very aggressive in going after people who tried to undermine his authority. You could probably imagine.
Well before this, Jackson knew he had to find a new vice president to run for re-election with him, and the Democratic Party chose the dude who pretty much built the Democratic Party, Martin Van Buren.
Van Buren is a very good choice here. He's, while Andrew Jackson is pretty politically savvy, honestly, more than he's given credit for. He's often kind of portrayed as just a brute. I think he was smarter than people give him credit for. But I think Van Buren was a great political tactician. He's going to carry out a lot of the stuff that Andrew Jackson is known for, kind of in the bad sense. Talk about Indian removal. A lot of that occurred under Van Buren, but it often gets put on Jackson. But I would consider that more of a team than anything else. I don't think Jackson's administration would be nearly as effective without Van Buren. Fun fact about him, he's the first American president, because he's going to follow Andrew Jackson. He's the first American president to not speak English as his first language. He spoke English, but his first language was Dutch. That's always fun. Another good thing about Van Buren, he's a New Yorker. That gives them a little bit of a regional balance here. A lot of presidential tickets will try to balance the North and South, have the VP, if the president is from the South, then they'll have the VP be from the North or whatever. That is something that they tend to worry about. So that works here. We have this northern guy who is a southern sympathizer. It works.
Sure, Jackson was popular with most of the people, but many in Congress disagreed with him on issues like his support for Indian removal, the spoils system, and getting rid of the Electoral College.
That's a lot. The Electoral College, that would probably be pretty popular now to get rid of. At the time, there being this kind of democratic force that Jackson was, getting rid of the Electoral College would probably be great for him. He'd definitely win the popular vote. If he's worried about anything, he's worried about the Electoral College screwing him over. What else did they say?
Support for Indian removal, the spoils system, and getting rid of the Electoral College.
The spoils system. That's what it is. Okay. The spoil system is basically when people stopped pretending to be above the fray, I guess. When people get an office, what do? You have a whole bunch of appointments to make. There are all sorts of jobs that need filling. Who are you going to put in those positions? Party loyalists. People who have directly helped you in your campaign. While there was a lot of like that sort of favoritism beforehand, Andrew Jackson is kind of unapologetically putting in people, and often people who are totally underqualified for the job, in these appointed positions, which people are going to hate that because at least when they did it before, they would pretend that they're doing it because this is the best guy for the job. Andrew Jackson, it's rather transparent that he's doing favors for the people who have done favors for him.
And getting rid of the Electoral College. The biggest issue in 1832 seemed to revolve around the renewing of the charter of the Second Bank of the United States. Ooh. Congress passed it.
The Bank of the United States goes back to Hamilton, and the bank was huge, and there are going to be their critics, but it is a very important force in the American economy early on, so much that James Madison, who was not a huge fan of the bank initially, ended up chartering the second bank, which is the one that we are dealing with here. And people like Jackson are definitely skeptical of banks. The guy lost a fortune, which is obviously going to make him skeptical of big financial institutions. There's no way it was his fault. But there are a lot of just ordinary Americans who are going to look at banks and they'll just think, oh, they just move people's money around. That seems kind of sketchy. I don't really trust them. If you're a farmer, you're probably not going to be a huge fan of banks. And Jackson's also not a fan of paper currency, which it's a dated concept at this point. Like we are so used to paper money, but it is subject to abuse, especially if unchecked. To a degree, I kind of sympathize with it if I try to put myself in the brain of somebody at the time, but knowing what I know now, it seems kind of silly.
Jackson, not a fan of central banking and paper money in general, vetoed the renewal of the bank's charter.
I didn't even think about that. He's on paper money now. That's funny. People have been wanting to take Jackson off of the 20, but now thinking about that, I think we should keep him on it. Just for fun. Just because he would have hated it. Or maybe he would have liked it. Maybe he'd come around to it if his face was on it. I don't know. But that's actually really funny. I never even thought about that. Who needs to replace Jackson? He hated paper money. Put him on the paper money, just get back at him. I'm gonna break that out at some point. That's a funny little bit of irony.
Withdrew federal deposits from the bank and redistributed them to private banks throughout the country. Jackson had a habit of vetoing a lot of legislation Congress passed. Actually, needless to say, opponents of Jackson's aggressive use of veto power called him King Andrew.
And that's not an uncommon nickname to get. If you are an aggressive American executive, that's going to happen. The veto power had been used in the past, but it was used sparingly. Jackson took full advantage of his veto power, and they thought that was kind of a way of him overwhelming the legislature. He's basically invalidating what is supposed to be their duty. These days, the veto power is fully understood as something that the president just naturally has. It's just something he has. We don't really think you can't do that because we know he can do that, but it just hadn't been used as aggressively before, so it seems like such an overstep given the time.
argued that not renewing the national bank would have devastating effects on the American economy. But Jackson convinced many ordinary Americans that by being against the national bank, he was just defending them against the privileged elite who wanted to keep the power to themselves. Jackson's opponents were led by, you guessed it, Henry Clay. Clay accepted the...
Oh, we'll get to Clay. Like, to a degree, this is a thing, because there are wealthy elites who take advantage of the financial system. That's naturally going to happen in pretty much any capitalist system or whatever. That's a natural product there. So Jackson, his argument is good because it has a grain of truth in it. That's one of those things. If you are going to work against people's interests, and honestly, it seems like the bank is a very good source for keeping the U.S. economy stable, you attack the little faults in it. And naturally, yes, it is. There are people who are going to support it who do so not out of the goodness of their hearts, but because it helps their wallets.
Nomination to run against Jackson for the newly formed National... Clay accepted the nomination to run against Jackson for the newly formed National Republican Party. Another name for that party could have been, quote, the People Who Hate Andrew Jackson Party. John Sargent from Pennsylvania was Clay's running mate this time.
And the Whig Party is not yet a thing. Henry Clay is going to be the biggest Whig figure probably ever. Like, there are other people who were Whigs who would be bigger names than Henry Clay. We have, like, Abraham Lincoln. But he won't be as big of a name until the Republican Party becomes a thing. But, yeah, the Whig Party is right around the corner. And I actually mean that this time. This isn't like when I said the Federalist Party is slowly dying and it took decades to do so. No, it's going to be a little faster than that, I assure you.
This was the first presidential election in American history in which a notable third party had a candidate on the ticket. The Anti-Masonic Party was created to oppose the Freemasons, who they perceived as corrupt and elitist. That sounds familiar.
The Anti-Masonic Party. And there are groups like this that are going to exist for a long time. There's an anti-Mason group that's going to make up a huge part of what becomes the Republican Party later on. So it's going to be sticking around for quite some time. We got a lot of major figures who are going to dabble in that anti-Mason stuff. We got, like, Thaddeus Stevens. I don't know if that name rings a bell. He's not really included much in the popular narrative, but he was in the Lincoln movie, so maybe you know him from that. But yeah, he was an anti-Mason. It's a very normal thing as the American identity starts to become a little bit more, I guess, clear. It's always going to be divided, but that is a huge part of American identity, like this anti-elitist tendency, which is often being thrown out by people who are in themselves kind of elitists. It goes back to the Jefferson tradition of him being a man of the people, but he's like this slave-owning, plantation-having aristocrat type dude. It's America. We are built on contradictions, and I think that's what makes our history so awesome. There's always something to break down.
They called out both Clay and Jackson as being associated with Freemasonry. The party held the first national nominating convention in American history. Many wanted Richard Rush as their nominee, but he declined. John Quincy Adams...
Richard Rush. I'm trying to think. Is he one of the... I'm going to Google this right now. I don't know a ton about Richard Rush, but I think he's part of the founding family. Yeah, the Rush, the actual Rush family. Let me take a look. Yeah, he is Benjamin Rush's son. I'm just making sure this is the right Richard Rush I'm looking at. Benjamin Rush was a huge founding father figure. He was a doctor. He was he was kind of a go-between between John Adams and Thomas Jefferson in rekindling their friendship after their presidencies were over. That's one of my favorite things about Benjamin Rush. But this is Richard Rush. He's part of that family. Cool.
Many wanted Richard Rush as their nominee, but he declined. John Quincy Adams was interested, but many party leaders thought the former president was just too unpopular. The Anti-Masonic Party ended up choosing William Wirt as their presidential
I know that guy.
despite the fact he was a Freemason. Crazy. Amos.
That is stupid. I didn't even think about that. That's funny. There are little things we take for granted. I would say they never really stood like a significant chance, but while John Quincy Adams was unpopular, he could at least stand toe-to-toe with somebody like Clay, at least. I don't know if anybody was ready to dethrone King Jackson at this point, but I don't know. Yeah, it doesn't seem like they had much going for them. This third parties are they have to kind of play the long game sometimes. You have to understand that you're not going to win this election, but you have to gain some ground. So maybe they don't have to put like one of these top guys forward. They just have to put somebody out who can communicate their message effectively. So yeah.
This Elmaker from Pennsylvania was his running mate. Can you tell Pennsylvania was an important state in this election? A fourth candidate, John Floyd from Virginia, was supported by the newly formed Nullifier Party, even though he didn't officially run for president. The Nullifier Party was basically a bunch of people in South Carolina upset about Jackson's support for increased tariffs that hurt the state. And here are the results. Andrew Jackson easily won re-election, receiving 219 electoral votes. He also got 54.2% of the popular vote, which is notable because no president was again able to get a majority of the popular vote in 2 consecutive elections until Ulysses Grant did 40 years later.
There's something about the popularity of military figures. It every once in a while, military figures tend to do all right in presidential elections, it seems. Especially if it's like immediately after a war. I think Andrew Jackson, we were so close to the War of 1812 when he got elected. Really, in the grand scheme of things, it wasn't that long. He's still a hero in everybody's mind. We got Zachary Taylor, who's kind of the product of the Mexican-American War. We got Ulysses S. Grant, who's the product of the Civil War. And they tend to find pretty significant success. I'm curious to how Zachary Taylor would have done if he had lived a little longer. I was always wondering how his popularity would have gone if he had a little bit more time.
Henry Clay lost yet another presidential election, coming in second place with 49 electoral votes and 37.4% of the popular vote.
Not that good, man.
Received 7 electoral votes.
That's also
and
not
came
good.
In third place with the popular vote at 7.8%. John Floyd received all of the South Carolina's 11 electoral votes, but they didn't count the popular vote there, so yeah, that was it for John. Martin Van Buren became the 8th vice president in history, even though all of the Democratic electors from Pennsylvania voted against him and instead voted for William Wilkins, a U.S. senator from, you guessed it, Pennsylvania. As crazy as it sounds, Andrew Jackson would be the last president until Abraham Lincoln to be re-elected. As much as some people hated him at the time, he remained oh so popular with most ordinary Americans.
Yeah, it's kind of crazy. Maybe this is why people don't care about this period in history, like following Andrew Jackson. A lot of this gets skipped over in your American history class, I'm sure. I doubt you've spent a lot of time on Franklin Pierce. But yeah, we don't get a lot of re-elections. We have some people who may have had the ability to get re-elected, but we have presidents dying in that time as well. We have William Henry Harrison, dies right in the beginning of his first term. He was a military hero. He might have gotten reelected. Who knows? We got Zachary Taylor. I don't know how he would have done, but I wouldn't necessarily happily bet against him. I don't know. That's a very interesting question. Maybe this circumstances just weren't right. I think James K. Polk could have gotten reelected if he really wanted it, but he chose to only run once. So, yeah, that whole period, it's just, if anybody could get reelected, things just didn't work out for them. 55.4, so the numbers are still high.
I'll see you for the next election, buddy.
So yeah, I'm starting to learn a little bit here. There are little itty bitty details in between that I just kind of take for granted because, like, who really cares? If Andrew Jackson wins by a whole lot, do I really need to know that much about the third party that's running? Well, it would be good. It would be good, but sometimes these details slip through the cracks, and that's something that I've enjoyed about this series because almost every episode I've learned at least one thing. It's something that I have enough information already in my head that I can picture a lot of it clearly, and it's just like broadening my horizon a little bit more. It's not going to be too long before we get into the presidential elections I know pretty much nothing about, which I'm excited to learn a little bit more about. Once we get into the 20th century, I'm gone, man. I don't know anything about that stuff, but I think this series is going to be a lot of fun to continue. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you did, leave a like, subscribe for more. I will be continuing this whenever I feel like it. I don't know. Thank you for watching. I'll see you guys next time.